everybody. Thank you for joining and welcome to the first of a series of short videos that we're going to be doing covering some of the challenges that you might be facing as SAP customers relating to your data. Today, we're going to be talking about data migration. I'm here with Michael Svensson, who's Head of Project Delivery at Xmateria, and been doing this for a long time. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the top 5 key factors to ensure a successful data migration, what you can be doing to give yourselves the best chance of success in your data migration projects. Michael, hello and welcome. Over to you, point 1.
Okay, so point 1, solid foundation. And here we're really talking about scope. And it's something that a lot of projects sometimes fail to get right, or they kind of keep it fluid. So it's very important to start off with defining your scope in an object inventory, and being clear about what those objects are, who owns them, who can take decisions on them. And then for those objects, defining what are you going to extract, what's the extract criteria, what's the selections, and understand how those data objects are represented in the target system that you're going to. And it's important to agree that scope up front with the wider program and all the relevant stakeholders, including the business, because that really sets you up on a solid foundation for the project as you start out. Yeah,
that's right. And it seems a very obvious point, doesn't it? But you do still see projects that have got underway.
Yeah.
And where it hasn't been, where there's maybe a general view of what is in scope for that data migration, but it hasn't been ironed out, agreed, documented.
That's right.
And I guess that leads into the second point as well, that if you are going to, it comes before everything else, and that you need that agreed scope to be sure of what your approach is for the project.
Yeah, exactly that. And that basically takes you into the whole, making sure you have a detailed approach and methodology. So you need to, be clear on, what are the phases and what are the deliverables that exist within those phases. And then very, very importantly, also make sure that that's integrated and communicated with the rest of the program in terms of deliverables. So for instance, a test cycle that feeds data, or a load cycle that feeds data into a test cycle is very important to understand that in terms of timings. So you get all that set up, and it basically enables you to do a detailed plan for the whole project, based on the scope we talked about in point 1, based on all of the, the approach and methodology, getting all that defined, setting up the plan, and then on top of that, having strong governance to govern that plan, making sure that you have entry and exit criteria as you go into test cycles, making sure test plans are in place, making sure you're clear on validation and reconciliation approach and who's responsible for doing that, and have named individuals for all those activities. And it just brings it all together, basically.
Yeah, and I think that clear methodology based on an agreed scope, points 2 and 1 there, that gives you a real structure to your project, doesn't it? And like you said, it forms the basis for your plan. And it forms the basis for your integration with the wider program plan, and it forms the basis for communication with the other teams in terms of what their responsibilities will be around data and when those things will happen.
Exactly.
And presumably people talk a lot about technology, and sometimes I think maybe too much about technology with regard to data migration, but the technical part of that approach is very important as well.
Absolutely. So it's about getting the right, mechanism and tool in place for the job. I mean, regardless of what tooling you use, the key is that it's something that is repeatable. It has to be scalable, and because you may want to be using this on future projects as well. And obviously, performance-wise, it needs to do the job. So it can't be something that's slow if you have got a tight project timeline or cutover window. And the whole point of having a repeatable, scalable, and high-performing tool set in place is that it reduces the effort, manual effort, and also overall, because it's should be performing exactly the same way for each cycle, reduce the overall risk of the data migration.
That's right, and it's that repeatability, isn't it? That repeatability is hugely important in terms of managing risk, and that's not the same as, and that's not necessarily meaning that you need to go and buy an expensive ETL product. You know, that technical approach could be something that you have built for the project, or that you have built for previous projects and you want to reuse, or that somebody builds for you. But the important things are that it's repeatable and scalable, and performs. You know, it's able to handle the volumes and complexity of data that are in scope, which brings you back to that you need to know what your scope is before you get started. So we're talking a bit about risk there. Could you, maybe leading into point 4, talk about the risk relating to the legacy data that's in scope, the data quality of that?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's always good to do is to, get an early understanding of the data that you have in your legacy system. Because yes, as you said before, Ben, it goes back to scope. So if you can get a clear understanding of what you got, that will help also feed into that scope definition that we talked about in point 1. And also it could potentially help identify any data challenges you got in terms of data quality. And you've then got time to deal with that if you do that early. And again, it goes back to what we talked about before in the previous point. All of that can help reduce the risk, later on in the program. So that done early on, and then you remove that risk, rather than trying to, identifying that while you're in the midst of the program itself.
Yeah, I think it's important for companies that haven't been through data migration or large-scale data migration very often or recently, to understand that it's not just a technical exercise. It's not the same as building reports or interfaces to a scope. I often think that the biggest challenge in any data migration, and the reason that the effort in a data migration doesn't tail away once you've built your solution, is that in the test cycles, what you're really testing is the suitability and completeness of your legacy data in your target solution. You're in a data migration, you're moving from one solution to another, and Xmateria or other companies can build you a technical solution to move data from A to B all day long. That's not what you're testing. What you're testing is does your legacy data work in your target solution? And that's why an early view of data, of the data in scope, and the quality of that data. And the quality of that data doesn't just mean missing fields, incorrect addresses, duplicates. It means, does it fill? Does it tie in and support the solution that you've built? And that's where the challenge is, and that's what we often mean by data quality.
Absolutely.
And what about coming up to point 5? Could you just talk to us a little bit about the importance of wider integration with the rest of the program?
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls other projects fall into is lack of business engagement. And I think that's one of the key points, is that you really want to get the business involved very early on in the project in terms of data migration. And that goes all the way back to point 1 in terms of getting them involved in the scope, them understanding their data, and buying into the approach that's taken, especially around data validation, where they should really be involved at the earliest opportunity, ideally from the first test cycle, so that they understand what's happening in the data migration, they understand the scope of it, they help define the scope of the migration, and then they get used to doing the validation as you go through the test cycles. It's not a last minute thing. Get the business involved in dress rehearsal and cutover. Get them involved early. That means that they can help on shape the whole process, and it becomes just another final time that they're going to do it when they do the actual production data load. And again, that just goes back to the point we've been talking about throughout all these 5 points. It helps reduce the overall risk of the data migration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you ask people who have been involved in multiple data migrations what the single biggest risk is to a data migration, it's often lack of business engagement. And I think the thing for businesses, customers to remember is that this is your data.
Exactly.
And once the project goes live, this is the data that will, it's a key asset to any digital business, and it really is the lifeblood of your system. So, get it right, get involved in the project, and in order to do that, you need to address some of the points that we've talked about in terms of the, firstly, we said the scope. Second, getting the right methodology in place. Thirdly, the technical approach and making sure that's fit for purpose with the scope and the volumes that you're talking about. Fourthly, getting an early look at your data and the quality of your data versus the target solution. And fifth, wider project and business engagement in the data migration process. So that's it, Michael. Thank you very much. A quick run through the top 5 priorities in order to drive a successful data migration. If you would like to discuss any of these points further with us, please get in touch. And thank you very much for joining us today.